The station had been bleeding neon for as long as anyone could remember, a crooked rectangle of light on the edge of a town that time had let lapse. People came and went at the proper hours, morning commutes, the afternoon rush, the last trains of Friday night. The platform smelled of diesel and old newspapers. The timetable on the wall, once neat in black type, had been rewritten by hand so often the paper had frayed. Daniel liked to watch the rails at night. He said the metal made sound like a promise. It hummed when the trains ran, a low, satisfied song. Tonight the platform was nearly empty. A scattering of late travelers and the vibrating neon of a diner across the street. He had missed the 11:30 return, a detail he blamed on a work meeting that had bled into another meeting, then into another email. No one else blamed him. In his city routine, missing one train mattered only in the way a dropped stitch matters to a sweater. The midnight timetable read like its own universe. Arrivals, departures, static. At 1:01:12, the final train was due. The bench under the clock creaked when he settled, the leather cold against his jacket. He checked his watch, then his phone. No bars. The big clock behind the ticket booth ticked once, twice, and 20 minutes had gone by since the time printed on the timetable. The platform lights blinked like someone breathing under a blanket. When the whistle finally sounded, in the distance it was soft. The way the sound you wait for always tries to be polite. A train coughed into view, an aging stainless steel carriage whose paint had learned to fade. It ran with a tired dignity, coming to rest with a shudder that set dust motes afloat. A red lamp hummed at every door. On. The train hissed and settled, as if content to be at rest. Daniel rose and climbed aboard. The interior smelled of lemon sanitizer and old wool. Overhead lights flickered, but stayed lit. The vinyl seats retained their shapes like fossilized curves. He stepped into the car and found himself alone. Nobody at the far windows, nobody sitting in the rows. The train felt as if it had been waiting for a single passenger to fill each empty seat with a story. He took the nearest seat by the window, set his bag on the floor, and sighed. The driver's cab at the front was dark, empty. A small TV that probably used to show route maps instead showed only static. He shrugged and pulled out a slim paperback to pass the time. There are small private rules when you travel alone at night. Keep your bag in sight. Don't sleep too deeply. Watch the doors. He told himself these rules like litany, like home remedies. The train pulled away with a slow economy of motion, a gliding step and then smooth acceleration. Daniel watched the platform recede. The diner's neon blurred into red and blue. The timetable, a blot of pale paper. The world outside the window seamlessly folded into a tunnel of night. He blinked and looked again. Station after station passed without stopping. No lights appeared where they should. No names on the little metal placards flickered past. Instead, the window showed only the dark, a kind of patience that never hurried. He checked the carriage interior again and realized he had not seen a single other face. At first he thought the train was some sort of express or a maintenance run borrowed from the schedule. But the red on light in every compartment seemed deliberate. He told himself that somewhere up front the driver sat, tapping a cigarette into a tin, exhausted and indifferent. He told himself the town's last ferry of commuter. The woman sat down at the far end of the carriage, like a sentence closing the paragraph. She wore a long black coat and a scarf pulled up high around her throat. Her hair fell in the way that makes faces unreadable. When Daniel glanced, she didn't move or do anything, only stared out into the tunnel, as if she were attending to something at a distance. Her presence made the car feel full in an instant, a single human filling the space with the expectation of company. At the next slight curve, the train seemed to pick up speed, though Daniel hadn't asked it to. The lights fluttered as if in sympathy, and the windows mirrored back the cavernous absence beyond them. Tunnel swallowed memory. He turned a page, watched the print swim slightly, as if the ink were being pushed by a breeze he could not feel. The woman rose when the train did a small, unannounced shudder. She was closer now in a way that made his stomach tilt, and he could see that the scarf did not hide a face so much as it hid the absence where a face would be. When she moved, she did it without the creak of knees. She slid down the aisle like a thought moving from one mind to another. He blinked and found her in his aisle seat. She had not asked. Someone had simply changed the world to make space. The scarf fell back, and a pale face emerged. Not pale in the way of wet, winter skin, but pale as if the flesh had been painted under a faint light that never warmed. Her eyes were open and intent, and had the slowness of someone discovering everything in tiny pieces. She tipped her head. The train seemed to make room for her voice, which was no voice at all at first, but a tilt toward melody, a sound that could be a sigh, a small music made of remembered sounds. Daniel told himself that he must have imagined it. He told himself a lot of things, and all of them were facts, until something else replaced them. When she looked at him, it was as if entire rooms inside him came into focus. You know the sensation. Eyes meet, and the world tilts. And someone somewhere writes the line. And then everything changes. The woman didn't speak. She smiled with a thinness that suggested kindness and a ruin of something older. "Do you know where this stops?" He tried. Safe questions that always have safe answers. He waited for a laugh, or an apology, or the shaking of a head. Her mouth formed words like a tide, silent on his side, until they reached him. "Home," she said, "where you always meant to be." He should have risen. He should have asked her if she'd boarded at some station, if she intended to get off at the next stop. He should have put space between them. Instead, he kept his seat and watched the train run on, through tunnels that neither ended nor changed. When he blinked, she was beside him, closer than before. He rubbed his eyes. When you're tired, faces can reshape themselves into shapes that fit the small things you want to believe. The small book in his hands felt suddenly heavier. The lights flickered out. For a breath, the train became the color of memory, and nothing else. Daniel looked down and realized that the woman's hands were empty, but on the seat beside her rested a ticket. Plain paper, the corners soft. When he reached to pick it up, it was warm, like it had been lying in a hand rather than on cold vinyl. He turned it over. There was no destination printed. Only a single word in faded ink. Return. The carriage nosedived into darkness, as if it had chosen a night thick enough to swallow even the notion of a map. No one called for a stop. No intercom wheezed into life. The train rolled on, and in the silence beyond the glass, something other than the man's heartbeat, made its small, persistent music. When Daniel woke up the next morning, he was sitting on a cracked concrete bench, beneath a sky some color between brass and ash. The train had gone. The platform was empty. The timetable on the wall had gentle circles of condensation around letters that said things like, "Schedule amended." The driver's cab at the end of the rails, where the last train had rested, was blank, and the seats were cold. There were no footprints except his, and no faces, except the ones in the diner's windows across the street, staring out like witnesses who had looked away too soon. On the seat where he had fallen asleep, the paper ticket remained. Its ink had run slightly in a way that suggested something else had been written, letters erasing themselves like tide marks. Daniel cradled the ticket between thumb and forefinger until it folded. He looked down at it and read the word that had been filled in overnight, as if the paper had learned to keep secrets for a living. There was no destination written where the line should be. The space at the bottom of the ticket had been scratched, not by pen, but by some small, careful claw, a mark like a nail through the idea of leaving. When he stood, his legs felt like parts of someone else's day. He walked to the exit and passed by the diner windows. The faces inside were ordinary, and their eyes flicked to him and away like small poems. No one remembered the woman, but the train timetable kept a new note in a hand that wasn't quite a human hand. Do not wait. The last train does not go where you believe. He folded the ticket into the palm of his fist and felt the heat of something he could not name. He asked the station master about the train. The man looked at him with an old sadness and told him what everyone said when afternoons go wrong. "It comes through," the station master said, "and if you get on, you get where you need to be. Folks that ride it sometimes don't." He lowered his voice. "They don't come back the same." Daniel understood the meaning in the way you understand a bruise. It hurt more to touch it than to leave it alone. He kept the ticket in his wallet. He slept badly for a week, waking often with the woman's smile folded into the corner of his mind like a hair. The city kept moving, tracks humming under the feet of trains that belonged to schedules. At work, people asked about projects, deadlines, about why he seemed thinner. He answered, and the words tasted like someone else's breath. On a dark Tuesday, when rain tightened itself to the windows, and he couldn't remember why he'd taken his umbrella from the stand, Daniel walked back to the station with the ticket folded in his pocket. Because there are small, private things that hide inside pockets, and some of them ask to be let out. He bought a paper for the station, sat by the bench, and read about flood warnings and school board meetings. The last train came as it always did. Late, dignified, a metal whisper. He pressed the ticket against the soft of his palm and felt the small scrape like a yes. He took his seat in the same carriage as before. The woman was there, as if she had never left, a place saved for him in the negative space beside her knee, like a mark on an unmade map. She smiled without teeth, and the train went. The tunnel accepted them. The lights dimmed. The windows became mirrors. When the carriage filled with the small, private music of motion, Daniel let his eyes close. Somehow, the train allowed for time to fold. He dreamed of streets he had only seen once in childhood, a shoreline he had wanted to visit, a small house that smelled like coffee and new books. He dreamed in the language of things he had missed. He woke up in an empty station that was not his own. The timetable on the wall had names that he recognized, as if from a life he had not yet led. The ticket in his jacket had one more line where a destination sat like a period at the end of a sentence. There was no station master answer the questions. The train had gone, and the tracks were cold. The paper ticket had no destination written, as it never did. But in his pocket lay a small photograph, a single Polaroid he did not remember taking. It showed a platform, a bench, a man seated where he once had been, a woman standing at his shoulder. His face was turned away. On the back, in a hurried small hand, a sentence. "This is the stop where we wait." He kept walking. Days blurred into a smear of burned pages and half-made coffee. Daniel could not shake the feeling that the city around him had grown smaller, as if something had claimed a chunk of his world and made a careful, quiet absence there. Each night he dreamt of the train, the same carriage, the same single woman, the same slow tilt toward some distant shore he could not see. His friends called him distracted. He told them about missing the last commute, about trains that rumbled like old dogs, and tried to make a joke of it. They laughed, the way people laugh at things they do not want to know are true. End quote. When he returned to the station a third time, it was nearly midnight again. The platform had the hush of a place that does not expect to hold more than a few people. A teenage boy sat with earbuds in, a pair of suitcases stacked neatly by his side. Another elderly woman sorted coupons like a priest counting rosary beads. A young couple argued softly about a lost key. All of them looked ordinary enough to prove that the world had not gone entirely crooked. Daniel took the same seat he had taken before. The carriage arrived like a patient animal. He climbed on. This time, there were others in the car. The teenager, the coupons woman, the arguing couple, and in the very far seat, news anchor posture, authoritative in an empty way, the lady in black. She sat like a center of gravity, her presence making the other passengers small in the strain of their attention. Daniel noticed that none of the other passengers seemed to look at one another, only out the windows into the dark, as if the tunnels outside were where a film might be projected when the lights in their own lives dimmed. The teenager fell asleep with a mouth open. He looked like a boy who had once been told to make a wish and had then been interrupted. The couple's argument faded into an embarrassed silence. The coupons woman hummed over her clippings, talking very softly about the price of milk, about a pothole on her street, about a granddaughter who had not called home. The train began to move. At first, it was just a line of tuneless motion. Then, gradually, the world outside turned into a succession of dark rectangles. The lights hummed overhead. The woman did not move. She watched Daniel with the calm patience of someone who has been waiting for several stories to arrive. "This is a strange route you run," Daniel said, because he wanted to speak, and the sound of his voice felt like an anchor. She smiled without a ripple and replied, the words folded like a page. "We all have roots." He attempted to relax, to be one more human inside a machine of metal and motion. The city fell away. The rhythm of the rails became a beat that might be mistaken for meditation or for sleep. It was not either. It was the sound of the world transforming. Daniel, when he opened them, the train roared through a gallery of images behind the glass. He did not know these places. Frozen streets, old storefronts, a dock where the light caught the water in a way that made it look like a sheet of broken glass. The windows reflected him and the others in pale frames. For an instant, his reflection looked older, as if time had rifled its fingers along his face and pushed a calendar within it. The woman put a hand, small and cool, on his jacket. It was an impossible weight, like the touch of winter sunlight. "You have been thinking of leaving little things undone," she said. Her words were literal and moored. They did not sound like they belonged to any dialect he knew. They made the inside of him shine in places he had kept dark. The teenager's breath hitched in sleep. The couple's hands found each other, like two ships finding harbor. The carriage grew warm. The light above dimmed until the woman's skin looked like ground bone. The train's motion was steady and inevitable. A hollow sound came from the metal wall at the carriage's end, the kind of noise that announces a change in schedule without adjusting the timetable. The elderly woman looked up from her coupons as if someone had said her name in a theater. At one of the pauses, a small man boarded at a place that wasn't on any map. He moved like someone who had been reading a book that included events from several lives. He sat opposite Daniel and smiled with the kind of memory that looks back at itself. He held a ticket between his fingers, like Daniel's, blank except for one word etched in the corner: home. Passengers do things to pass the time. They clean their nails, they hum, they check their watches. They fold their hands against the map of a life. The train stopped at nothing and everywhere at once. On the other side of the glass, day became a bright wrongness for a fraction of a second. Faces, places, another station sign that might have been his hometown, but was not. When the train started again, the woman in black reached out and handed him the ticket. "Keep it," she said, "for when the path becomes long." He took it with the intimacy of a promise that no one else could witness. He slipped it into his wallet. It was warm there when he left the carriage, at a place whose name he did not recognize, but where the platform smelled like a place that could have been the beginning of something. He stepped down and walked. He did not know if he would ever come back to the train. He told himself he would not. He told himself many things and folded each into the bottom drawer of his life. Yet in the small hours, the image of the carriage returned like a tide. Carries of other people, their nameless faces, the slow, steady woman who always knew the end of a story before you did. On nights when thunder made the windows rattle, he woke to the idea that maybe trains held things in their bellies, things that did not want to get off. When Daniel took the train again, he went with the intention of watching the regular schedule, of confirming that the world always returns itself to a place where maps make sense. He told himself there would be a normal city at the other end, and perhaps there was. He had a strange, stubborn hope that the woman in black would have been a one-night thing, a hallucination of a sleepless man. The carriage was different that night. There were more people, a girl whose hair had been braided by a grandmother's hands, a father with a briefcase whose knuckles were white with something unsaid, a young woman who looked like a teacher, carrying a small paper crown in her bag. They were all ordinary in a way that hurt to look at, because their ordinariness hinted that something new had been woven into normal life. The car had more luggage too. Bags with pin badges, a child's red backpack, a shopping tote with a grocery list, half peeking out. Daniel settled into his seat and opened his notebook. He had begun to keep a small, detailed list of the stops he recognized, and the stops that were not anywhere on a map. He wrote the time and then the color of the night, and sometimes a word indicating mood. Cold, patient, tired. This night he wrote, "Passengers collect things. Trains collect lives." The woman sat again at the far end. When she smiled this time, Daniel realized her face had a slight scar at the jaw, as if life had once taken a contour from her and returned a new shape. Her hand, when it brushed the pamphlet, had a faint dusting of ash. At one unremarkable moment, flashes on the glass, a flicker in the light, the train shuddered, and a sound like 100 clocks clicking began. People reached for devices, for objects, and in the lull, a voice from the overhead spoke through the carriage in a tone wholly unlike the station master's announcements. The voice was small. The voice was a welcome. It said, ... Passengers, you are advised your ride will continue as scheduled. Please hold your tickets until the end of your journey. It was not the train's voice, and it was not the woman's either. It belonged to the rails. Daniel later would not be able to write who actually said the words, because memory thins around the parts we do not understand. The elderly woman next to him tucked in her coupons and breathed shallowly, as if counting pleasant things. The teenager's earbuds had come free, and he listened to a song that made his shoulders move with recollection. They were a chorus of small activities that meant people were still entirely themselves. At a stop that appeared like an afterthought, an old man boarded with a small wooden box. It fit in his hands the way something precious fits. He looked at Daniel and said as if in apology, "We all carry things we're meant to give to the world." When the train left, the old man's hands rested on the box, and the box seemed heavy enough to cause the carriage to dip. Daniel watched the hands, but could not look away from the old man's face. It was carved with a map of memories. He wondered what the box held. He imagined toys or letters, a broken watch. At the next tunnel, a pale light passed like a blade. Suddenly, a child's voice whispered a name so close to Daniel's ear, it was impossible. He thought of all the names a person collects, the ones given to them, the ones they steal back, the ones they never say aloud. The young couple reached for each other. The teenager's mouth moved even though his body slept. "You have carried many small regrets," the woman said. Daniel swallowed. It felt as if someone had caught him cataloging his life and was laying claim to each page. You don't know me," he began. She did not seem offended. "I know what trains do." She tapped an old seat across from her. The old man lifted the lid of his wooden box. Inside were photographs, black and white images, of people on platforms, of benches, of a woman with a hat turned just so that her face looked like a boat on the water. On the back of one is written, "Return," in handwriting that was almost the same as the ink on Daniel's ticket. The old man closed the box and sighed, and the train rode on. The carriage once again became a small world. At a stop made of splinters and rain, someone got off. It was the teenager. He stood, stretched, and walked down the platform that did not appear on any map. He was alone. Daniel watched him go and felt the exact cut pressure of something missing. The teenager never turned back. ... When the man left with his box and the teenager with his phone and the couple with their hands interlaced, the carriage was only half full. The woman remained, unbothered, as if she had been appointed to keep the others company. "Why do people not return the same?" Daniel asked, finally, pressing the question like a coin against glass. She tilted her head. "You might not notice a small seam in your sweater," she said, "but leave it unattended long enough, and the seam will unravel the whole knit." The train moved as if in agreement. The man with the wooden box hummed a small tune. The elderly woman rearranged her coupons. The world outside the window had its own routines. Alleys that smelled of laundry, a lamppost or two, a dog that sometimes ran along a strip of platform and then vanished into the dark as if swallowed by nostalgia. When Daniel left the carriage that night, he was lighter and heavier at once. Lighter for having learned nothing definitive, and heavier because there was no way to stop the knowledge at all. Daniel learned that passengers on the last train sometimes returned days later, and sometimes years later. They came back with hair a little different, their mouths set as if someone had taught them to keep their lips in a new place. They had small rituals. They refused to talk about the path. They kept tickets folded a certain way in a drawer. They set a mug in the sink that no one ever washed. An old station man told Daniel about a woman who came back blinking once and never spoke again. The way some birds stop singing after an event. Another returned with a music. Daniel kept a notebook and an index, crossing stories with times and places. He made a habit of sitting in the diner afterward and writing the accounts, his pen scratching like a train's wheel along rail. He collected a kind of portfolio of the edges of the city's nights. As winter drew near and the nights grew long, a cluster of names emerged in his notes. People who left and came back, people who boarded and didn't return, and those who fell in love with the idea of the train so completely they joined it on purpose, making their small exit into a larger tale. Each story was Polaroid sharp and then blurred on the edges in the telling. It was at the far end of a night shift, near dawn, that he found a woman who had braced herself against the station's cold and looked like the person who holds a lifetime of bread in their hands. She had a ticket in the pocket of her coat, inked but with a blot that looked like a tear. "You ride the last..." She studied him without surprise. "Not often. Why?" He told her about the woman in black, about the wooden box of photographs, about the man who said trains collect things. She shook her head once and gave a small, private laugh that had the quality of someone who has read a good book and then hidden it under a pillow. "My son wrote it," she said at last, "years ago. He left town for a reason he never quite said. He came back different. He kept a ticket in his wallet until it frayed." "Did you ask him where he went?" Daniel asked, trying to make the question small enough to fit in a cup. She smiled and nodded. "I did. He said he had been to places where the sky was a certain color and the people spoke of things you could not hold. He said, "Mama, some trains take you to answers." And did he find them? She folded a hand around her ticket, as if to warm it. Some answers are like a map made of glass. You can see where you might go, but you cannot step without cutting your feet. At the base of her thumb, a tiny crescent-shaped white scar on a late night when he had poured another cup of coffee and the station's lights hummed like tired bees. A man from the Lost and Found brought Daniel a small paper packet. "Found on platform 3, he said. It was a ticket with no destination and a smear like an old fingerprint. The man shrugged. Some people leave them. Some they bring back. Daniel opened it like a letter. Inside lay a single Polaroid, mute and bluish, a man sitting on a platform. A woman beside him, with face turned away. On the back, someone had written in a slow slant, "Do not wait." The note had a small circle by the left margin that might as well have been a fingerprint. As the days thinned into a winter that had the economy of blank pages, Daniel became more courageous or more foolish. He could not tell which. He began to ride the train with the explicit purpose of watching. The last carriage became a stage where actors of all sorts filed through, some stepping, some passed like flickers. He filmed discreetly, taking in the way people adjusted their coats and how at certain points the woman in black would look at someone across the car and nod as if to say, "It is time." Not all exchanges were mystical. A soldier sat down with a duffel bag and offered to anyone within earshot a story of distant snow. A pair of teenagers shared a look that was both private and resolute. A merchant asleep in his uniform caught himself blinking awake with a small, satisfied smile. People who have the habit of moving between trains. One night, a mother boarded with a child who held a stuffed rabbit by its ear. The boy's hand was small enough to be folded into the mother's palm. She looked exhausted. Daniel watched them and tried to imagine the wound the train might pluck, like a weeding that removes only a certain root. The woman in black smiled at them, and their faces softened. The way clay. That night, a man who had once missing his wife's funeral took a ticket out of an old coat pocket and placed it upon the bench in front of him. He stared at the ticket until his eyes emptied to the edges, and then slowly folded it, cedar-scented and warm with meaning. Later, he would get off at a stop that was quiet and small and walk toward a house with a porch light and a woman waiting. Daniel recorded all of it, because he wanted to believe that if he made a ledger long enough, the pattern would prove something. That the last train was not just a thief, but also a fairy, that sometimes return meant a different currency altogether. He did not want to admit the most sinister possibility, that the last train simply rearranged what a person could be. It was during one such winter evening that Daniel noticed something else in the carriage, a faint catch in the air, as if someone had left a door open somewhere and a slow wind had carried the sound of something else through. The woman in black met his eye, and for the first time he saw something like hesitation. A small child boarded then, alone, clutching a folded scrap of paper. The train car grew solemn as a retelling. The child's eyes darted around like a small animal. And when he sat, he put the scrap on his knees. He taped it to his sweater with a small, stubborn piece of tape and looked at it like someone looking at a map. "What's that?" Daniel whispered, as the child's mother would have. if she had been there to ask. The woman in black said, "A place to fold a dream into." That night, the train stopped in a station that had a name Daniel did not know. The boy left with his scraps still taped to his sweater. The man with his folded ticket, for reasons that belonged to him alone. The woman in black, as if to punctuate the ritual, rose and walked to the end of the carriage, and then quietly disappeared as the doors closed. Daniel stepped off the train, rubbed his hands for warmth, and for the first time felt not a pull to be part of the current, but the cold of watching one less actor in a crowd, someone who had always been present and then slipped away. There are objects that carry a curious authority, the way a key belongs to a lock or a ring to a finger. Tickets are one of those objects. They are paper and ink, but they can also hold the memory of a crossing. Daniel kept looking at them, counting the ways people stored them, folded in wallets, tucked behind mirrors, laminated into shrunken rectangles. One afternoon, in a shadowed corner of the station's lockers, he found a stack of tickets tied together. They had been kept there by someone who'd left them to thaw like bread. He traced ink with the care of a mason. On each slip, there were notes written in a pencil whose hand grew patient on the margins. The notes were not directions, but stories. Woman who lied to her sister, man with a watch that stopped, child whose laugh went missing. Each ticket's small annotation was a poem of a life. He took one and read the tiny lines. "Return if you dare to the place where you forgot the name of your father." He folded the ticket back and put it in his pocket. The woman in black found him on the platform as he emerged from the locker room. She said, simply, "Tickets require something of you, but not always what they ask." "You said something like that before," Daniel replied. She tilted her head. "I said it because it is true. People sometimes believe the train takes them away from pain. Often, it simply gives them a scaffold on which to hang their sorrow." "What do you want from me?" he asked, which was a frank sentence with little circumference. "Only to notice." Her voice had the softness of someone who hears the world the way an organ hears chords, deep, resonant, ancient. He kept writing. He kept writing. He kept buying coffee and handing the ticket to strangers he thought might appreciate its particular kind of charm. He learned what the train did. It accepted what you brought, and in exchange, made you something else. People who returned from the route often reported similar changes, new habits, new scars, a photograph always on their kitchen wall. One morning, a woman approached Daniel on the platform with a child asleep on her shoulder. She asked if he had ever lost a thing he could not afford to find again. He thought of small, aching losses, a friendship cut short, the sound of his father's voice, a photograph burned in a rush. He told her he had, as everyone does, and she put a coin into his hand that felt like the scale of a life. Heavy, small, metallic. "For luck," she said. "For found things." The coin was smooth and warm. Daniel kept it like a talisman, the way a player keeps dice. He held it when the carriage cut through the dark, when the woman in black handed him a pamphlet, and when a small child reached for the coin and then decided not to take it. Every narrative needs a reckoning. Daniel thought the last train was a curiosity to be traced, a myth to be made into habit. Then one night in late winter, After a storm had flattened sleep into the city streets, he learned that the train keeps ledgers in ways that no paper can record. He was seated at his usual place, the carriage familiar and the faces oddly comforting. The woman in black sat at the far end as always. The train slid like a quiet sermon through the darkness. In the car was a small group, people he recognized from other runs. One had a scar across his palm, another, a child who refused to sleep. The train's rhythm became insistently loud, like a phrase repeated until it becomes a memory. Daniel, pen idle in his journal, looked up. The woman in black was no longer at the far end of the car. She was beside him. Her eyes were only ink now, but they had a gravity that tugged. Keep this, she said, or you might learn the wrong lesson. It was a ticket. He laughed then, larger than a laugh should be for a thing that was also a warning. He wanted to bargain, to train curiosity for certainty. He wanted to offer the woman his pen, his notebooks, his small collection of found things. He wanted to give the train some proof that he had been kind. She smiled, as if he had answered correctly. She did not take any of his offerings. She only said, "There are decisions that make a map of a life. You cannot refuse them forever." At the next stop, half the carriage left. They were ordinary people in ordinary clothes who slipped off into early mornings. The couple, whose hands were always linked, kissed and departed. The teenager waved and disappeared into a station that breathed steam like a living thing. When the train resumed, it let out a small, private breath. Only 3 remained. Daniel, the elderly man with the wooden box whose lid had grown a new line in the grain, and improbably, a woman who had never before spoken to Daniel. Her hair was silver, the color of rain, and she had quiet hands. She looked like someone who had been waiting a long time. The carriage kept moving. The man opened his box one last time and showed Daniel a photograph of a platform from years ago. Children running, a dog, a bench. "This train," he said, "takes what the world cannot hold." He tapped his wrist like someone who checks the hours. At the station where Daniel had first boarded months before, he stood to leave. The night had a feel of the end of an argument, inevitable and final. The woman in black stood as well. She walked with a steadiness as if she had decided a path. She slipped something small into Daniel's palm, a ribbon, blue of twilight. "Keep it for when you need to find the way," she whispered. And then she was gone. He left the train into the dawn, and the paper ticket in his hand, blank as always, felt like a map he could not yet read. He walked toward the diner and the station master who would pour him black coffee and greet him like an old friend who has aged. In the corner of a shelf, in the diner, a small photograph lay, buried under change. It showed a platform populated with people who looked as if they had just decided to stay. Daniel stared and realized with a cold clarity that it was his own face in the Polaroid, an echo of himself already stored like a film negative in another cupboard. You cannot know you are part of a story until you are finished telling it, and sometimes not even then. He sat and wrapped his hands around a cup until the warmth made his fingers glow, and the world outside settled into its ordinary rhythm. The train's steel song hummed under the town, like a memory of something that once was, and perhaps always would be. He put the ticket in his wallet for the last time. Years later, when he had grown a little older and the edges of his face had learned the myths of worry, Daniel would sometimes walk past the station and pause by platform 3. The city had changed. Shops had shifted and new timetables had been printed. The last train still ran. The woman in black did not. Sometimes young people would ask him about his experiences, and he would tell them, in the small, careful way of a man who knows a ruin affects people differently. He told them the stories he could tell, of a carriage full of ordinary things, of a wooden box of photographs, of tickets that hold more than ink. He left out the parts of which he had no language. He did not describe the feeling that a life might be adjusted like a hat, pulled down against cold until it covers the ears. At night, when the city breathed and a wind skated across the tracks, he often dreamed of platforms that had no end, and of a woman who smiles like a doorway. He would wake with a ribbon in his hand sometimes, or with a Polaroid turned face down on his bedside table. He kept the ticket folded against a page of his heaviest notebook. It had no destination written, no final proof. It was only a small, objective thing that refused to be simply thrown away. If you ever find yourself on the platform as the late hour draws on and the lights begin to blur, if the carriage glides in and someone offers you a ticket with blankness where the endpoint should be, remember that trains keep ledgers as quietly as they keep time. They are obliging, but exact. They are patience made of steel. Sometimes the last train goes where you expected. Sometimes it goes farther and remakes the town in ways you recognize. But sometimes it goes where you can only find out by riding. And when it does, the only safe rule is this: bring nothing you cannot afford to lose. And if, when the train stops, you find a photograph on your seat with your own face in it, do not be surprised. Take it home. Keep it like a map you will never read. Keep it like a token for weather. Keep it like a thing that knows your seams.